All right, well, welcome to the Environmental Action Committee meeting. I'm Sarah Lewis. I'm chair of the Environmental Action Committee. I'm also City Council member for Ward 4. And I'd like for us to go around and introduce ourselves. So James, would you like to start us off?
James Barton. I'm a committee member for Northeast Fayetteville.
Cindy Cope, volunteer in the community.
You good?
Richard Russell, new committee member.
And we'll give you a round of applause. Congratulations. Glad to have you.
They wanted someone scientific. I have a degree in geology. I've lived in Fayetteville since 1961.
All right.
Yeah, well, we're going to tap your brain. That good geology.
Hey, I'm Aubrey, and I live in East Fayetteville, and I think I'm here as an at-large citizen.
Okay. And then we have a guest.
Yeah, I'm Sarah Reed, and I'm the city's stormwater engineer. I'm also the floodplain administrator, and so I'm your guest to talk about some drainage things tonight.
And she also recently got her professional engineering license.
Oh, congratulations.
Congratulations. That's cool.
Yay. So that's PE after the name now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a big deal, letters.
Yes.
And John?
John Coleman, Ward 2, and I work with the city of Fayetteville.
Good. And so our agenda today is to talk about the priority drainage projects, and specifically Sarah is going to talk about that. But then also, while we have Sarah here as who can help us kind of answer questions on the part of and also John, I guess, to talk about from the city's point of view, the development review process for city projects, and then also something that I've come upon, and also Sarah and I have met out at people's houses about drainage issues between private property owners. And so I know that I've spoken with individuals about that, so I would like this committee to talk about that. And since we have our city stormwater person here, I thought it would be good to have that conversation. And I'm not entirely sure that we have necessarily any specific action items that need to come out of that, but at least we need to be more knowledgeable about it and what our options are, or what citizens' options are, because it's something that keeps coming up. So Sarah, can you tell this group more about the council was asked to consider moving the focus from some of our overlay projects for sidewalks and streets, and moving that funding to focus on some key areas that have been flooding regularly for years, I would say. And so can you tell us kind of what that is?
Right, so with the flooding in April and then some more flooding in May, obviously we were just bombarded with requests for anything from maintenance type things, like just gravel's clogging something up, we need to get it out of there, to larger problems like houses flooding, is the biggest problem. And so, so we needed to look at, are we going to, be able to service all these requests, or what are we going to do about this? So that's why the Transportation Division did ask City Council, can we put more resources towards doing this maintenance? And it's a really big list of maintenance type things. And then along with that list, like kind of parallel to that list, we have some other drainage areas that we consider more like capital improvement projects. Really big. The one at the top of our list is we call it the Upper Skull Creek. It's a historic area, like Olive, Maple, up in that area. The drainage system is just very old, very evolved over time, needs help. So that's one that we've been deciding on, and we'll hope for CIP dollars for that one at a later date. But for this summer, what Transportation's working on is they've asked engineering to help with about 20 of these projects. Most of them are flooding one house. there's just little isolated instances where there's just something not going right with our drainage system. A couple of them are flooding, driveways, which can also be a pretty big problem for a homeowner, and then a couple are flooding buildings, but mostly it's flooding houses. Things like, just lack of, the driveway doesn't work with the curb, just things happen, undersized culverts.
Well, I thought it was, one thing that was interesting that they did was, they used the GIS system, the GIS department took, and they took the data for all the calls and mapped those to the addresses from which they've received calls for complaints for flooding or stormwater problems, and they mapped those, and then they overlaid, and they collected those from since '06.
Right, since we started putting that information to GIS.
Yeah, and they had a map of Fayetteville with that blue dots everywhere, and then they overlaid the ones they received just during the April flood, and there was a correlation between the ones they received over and over and over and over again, the same spots, and the ones they received for the flood. And so they decided, that information, that visual information helps better understand that, oh, there's a consistent and repeating problem in these areas, and it's even more severe in a flood like the one in April. So that really helped the council decide to go ahead and take some of the, I guess it's transportation funding for overlay for sidewalks and move it to enable some focus in the stormwater. The thing that is in regard to the Environmental Action Committee and some of the work that we've been doing, of course, and some of the things that I bring up consistently are, how are we going to address those issues? And the thing that I brought up during the agenda meeting was, it's a really useful tool for GIS to look at that point where the call is coming from. But I'm hoping that, and you heard me say this, and you're not even, but looking at the water, the basin, so what's happening in that little watershed, and not just what's at that point. So that's another part of this.
So that you're looking at a bigger picture, not just trying to solve one problem that actually could create something somewhere else, or.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So Sarah, the funding, it's just, did they transition for just 1 year, or is it 2 years?
For 1 year.
Okay.
And as we looked at those density of the, we just call them the dots, there's, I think there's 3 areas that stand out, and as like the capital improvement, like the millions of dollars kinds of areas. And you guys are welcome to tell me what you think. I kind of feel like those are the areas where maybe we can look at the whole watershed, where we can look at detention more effectively than on the areas where you're addressing a smaller issue. But
Where are those areas? Or are you, like
Upper Skull Creek, what I call Upper Hamstring Creek, which is like the Lewis Sang, Cleveland Berry area, Weddington area. And the other area I call Missouri Creek. A lot of people don't know where Missouri Creek is, but it runs along Old Missouri. It's
oh, I sampled that creek once.
okay.
Yeah.
It's Stagecoach Oak Cliff.
It's like, yeah, Sweetbriar.
Right by Mud Creek, or the trail.
It's a tributary into Mud Creek.
Okay. It's going to Mud Creek, and that it's almost an entirely residential
basin.
Yeah, basin. And it has some really high flows on the streets. I don't know if as many houses flood there, but it has some.
I saw
Little
film
streets.
footage of that during the flood. It was really, it was huge.
Yeah. Is it something that, I don't know, I'll ask her. It seems like, is it something that you know, you're talking about these 3 areas, there's the potential for watershed scale approach to this. And I think that now's the time if there's has there been anything done in these areas yet as far as work or design or?
There's design work done on the upper Skull Creek.
Okay.
And
So what does that look like at this point?
a lot of it has to do with rerouting the drainage culverts. It has drainage culverts now, and a lot of them cut across private property. There's a few that go underneath houses, and it has to do with getting them into the streets. So that's just and it's upsizing them. So it's an area where it would be good to do some detention if we can find a space big enough.
So is that?
These sound like, you know, if you didn't have the GIS system, you would look at the map like a topo map, or just look at the history, and you'd say, well, these are low areas, and they tend to flood, and they've probably flooded for a long time. You know, it's not to say that these people don't need help, but can you really fix it? I mean, that's the first question that I would ask. Are we going to suggest throwing money at a problem that
Right.
there's not really a solution?
The upper Skull Creek one is not low. It's on the hillside. Some people might call that Mount Sequoia. I don't know. It's
It's
the
kind of
base of it anyway.
Like assembly? Assembly.
So
But
what's
what
the
you're
cause?
getting at, there are places where it could make more sense to purchase a house than to try to engineer the drainage.
The
And
cause
in the
is
floodplain areas.
that old development before flood control measures were implemented. You've got a lot of impervious surface from the rooftops and streets, and so even on a hillside that's not in a low-lying area like a floodplain area. So it's not like they allowed, in that area at least, they allowed homes to be built in areas that shouldn't have been built in the first place, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's more of just the concentration, density of homes, density of streets.
And I
And then
think
there
what you're
was-
saying is that it was a good spot at one time,
Mhm.
because there was a lot of surrounding land that could soak up the rainfall, or it could flow off into a different direction. But as development has occurred, some of these houses that have been there for a while, turns out they're not in a very good spot.
In the historic area, you see that people were dealing with the drainage historically, but they were all just doing something. So one guy came along and did a rock channel, and then maybe at some point it got, it is just very disconnected system. People engineered over time on their own. And now the other 2 subdivisions are later, and maybe there was a little bit more of an overall plan, but it's just inadequate.
Yeah, and the problem is that I live at the bottom of a small hill, and probably one of the developments you're talking about, and it's been a 20-year issue. I've tried French drains, we've tried rain gardens, now I have a dry creek. We're gonna try that. And it doesn't flood the house, thank goodness, so I'm lucky, but when you have 5 inches of rain, nothing
Well,
can absorb it.
sounds like my house too.
Yeah.
It's on a hill, and we've got a flower bed that it became a gully for a while. And we just had to go back and patch it and hope it didn't rain for a while. Unfortunately, I got my wish.
Well, one thing, you know, that is a flood, that was a flood. And that was a flood. No matter what your stormwater was on that it was flooding. The thing that, what I would call genius behind overlaying these and looking at the problem areas, those are consistent areas. Even in a 1-inch storm, they were getting calls about these areas. So even in minor rain events, these red dots on the map were being problems. And that's what, like these areas on the hillside where there's not a lot of soil, it runs off quickly, and there's a lot of roofs and driveways and roads that goes straight to those ditches really fast, and it's a lot of water, and it's, and the ditches, probably were once little rills, you know what that is? Little gullies, and that have grown, you know.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned design. Your department, does it do design?
We do design.
You do a lot, or do you farm it out, or do you have a staff that?
We have done some of both, and it just depends on the project and our workload, and we've done it both ways.
In general, do you have an appetite for doing it in-house?
We kind of do.
Are you doing this in-house? This is in-house?
This stuff this summer that we're working on will definitely be in-house.
I know of one.
They're what I call, they're short projects. And we'll be trying to roll out quite a few of them. And then the Upper Skull Creek, for example, we did a combination of having an outside consultant study it, and then in-house we have found places for done a lot of the further work on it, the further design work on it.
The reason I'm kind of concentrating on that for a minute is because in the late 90s, the city did some design build, and I'm thinking of one that you might be familiar with. It's Trust. It's a system that starts up the little street trust that goes off of Assembly.
I'm familiar with Assembly, but not Trust.
Well, there was maybe that's something to go check out during the big event, because it was a tour de force of structures, and I think it's been really effective. I was looking at it during the mega event that we had, and it was almost an impossible task, but it was doing it. It delivers it down to Mission, right there where, I believe I'm right, Simply and Mission come together. So, future reference.
Yeah.
That was designed by the city.
That makes me think of one thing I think of sometimes with when I talk to maybe like just a private person, and I basically end up saying that it's a private property issue, and they're still trying to solve it on their own, and so I don't get to see the fixes that private property owners found, like you're talking about how you're working on yours. I don't really get to see the ones that are working really well. And sometimes people show me like, oh, my landscaper did this, but it's not big enough, it doesn't work. And
so you need some examples of things that are working?
I would love working examples.
Yeah.
And if it was somewhere visible, I could say, well, this is what, I could try to tell somebody about something, because we drive by that house and look at what that.
I think that's a really good idea.
That might be an
I was
average.
actually thinking that, wouldn't it be cool if this group took some tours of these areas? And also, I love the idea of helping you find good ideas. And, defining good idea is
Right.
also, there may be different philosophies on that. But,
Yeah.
and because, well, so I think that's something we might be able to help with as a group. Is that, even if you're talking to, like, in my yard I have something that does work, and in the flood it worked, and it's it's something that I would be happy to share. But I also have friends that have other structures that they've built, and
Well, my rain garden is right on the edge of the property, and anybody can take a look at it, and it's planted with primarily native, so it works most of the time.
yeah.
So you'll be touring on a rainy day.
We need to tour on a rainy day.
This would be a last minute call, I guess.
If we ever have one again.
Right, yeah. Well, I think just I don't know if that's, maybe not everybody could go, but looking at these areas and giving, I don't know, it may not even be useful, but doing one of those tours with you and Terry, that was really interesting.
After a big rain's good too. You'll see the debris lines.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point though, because you do get the calls when it's not working, but nobody ever calls up to tell you gotta come look and see how well this,
Yeah, I wish they would.
this is working.
That's a good idea, I know,
Well, on
really.
Easter Sunday morning during the flood, I saw something that may have been working for a moment, but not something you would actually want to see. So I called her and got all upset about it. I mean, how one person was solving some of the water issues in their
Oh,
property.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was working, and that leads us to our next topic, actually. Okay, we'll skip to number 3 on the agenda with that.
Okay.
So, okay, so something that you and I visited people before that they've had a situation where one neighbor has been working so hard to fix their drainage. There's 2 different stories. One, there's work that's being done that maybe there's construction, or maybe they cut down some vegetation, or they design something and they're just doing their thing, and it causes a drainage shift in neighboring properties. Or the neighbor is really trying very hard to fix their drainage, and in turn causes the drainage to change on neighboring property. So the question is, well, there's 2. You've seen this happen? You've seen this happen?
Right. And we're not
And
talking
what-
about the neighbor build a house, that, like, just stuff people do. Like, their houses are there and they're.
Well, I guess where is the city, because there are new policies that this group gave input on about in a new development, that can't happen.
Try to prevent it.
We try to prevent it. Well, in the designing, there has to be, what am I trying to say? Connection,
Consideration.
but consideration of the surrounding drainage, which is new.
Mhm.
And that's this group that helped initiate that. That's great. So, but sometimes it's not even during the building, it's just other things. So where is the city on that? How can the city play a role in that, or does the city play a role in that, or where is that?
We often don't play a role in that. And those can be very difficult issues. You're dealing with personalities and people's homes and what they want. You usually have somebody who's very upset on one end, at least one end. So I guess, so those are really difficult. And we can't tell people, we can't say you must do this. We have occasionally, what would you say, like, just play middleman a little bit.
Mediator.
That can be
Mediator.
a mediator. That can be very time consuming. It can get difficult. So, but I don't, as it stands, we really can't, make those people solve the problem for the other. We usually end up telling them that it's a civil matter and they'll have to work it out.
Okay.
So how does that get worked out then? I mean, do they end up in court with each other? Do they, I mean, what
I
what
think-
would you do?
I think I'm sure people have. And I think it's a difficult issue to take somebody to court over, because can you prove what the hardship is that they're causing you? And I think the laws are vague on it. And it would depend on the situation a lot.
So, I spoke with, or do you have any other
No.
information? Okay. I spoke with Jeremy about it as well, and it's been something that I've been curious about, because it seems like I didn't know if the city can the city say you have to, and I know that some cities out there in the world are saying you have to deal with your drainage on your property. Like, if it lands on your land, you have to deal with it there. And that's an aggressive policy.
Do you know what cities?
Portland, Seattle have something like that.
Well, there's a component of that in the city of Fayetteville's
Mhm.
guidelines. That-
For a development.
Yeah.
You
If
have
it's
to,
developed,
yeah.
but if it's change in vegetation or even grading, small scale grading,
It doesn't.
doesn't encompass that. Because there's, I think there's a lot of that that goes on. It's just, it's kind of it's almost a volume thing, and then it's kind of a reach determination thing too. It's like, where do you want to, how do you want to insert? I mean, so that's, I think that's the big question.
So if there's a drainage plan to be approved, then that's a point in the space and time where you can weigh in on it.
Right.
But if it's just a practice in someone's backyard,
Right.
that's harder to intervene with.
And sometimes it's two houses where one just really runs off to the other, and nothing's really changed. It's just been a bad situation for years. And sometimes it starts to get worse.
Well, and that's what Jeremy was saying, that one reason that the city, Fayetteville hasn't pursued something like this was the liability, apparently. Yeah, which I'm not, so is the city liable? So if they say, you know, if there's something that says you can't affect another person's drainage, then if the city takes that on, is the city then liable somehow? I didn't see how
To uphold
that.
our ordinances.
I think it's the volume thing.
It's the volume.
I talked to him just a little bit about
Okay.
it yesterday, and it was more of, if we were to go in that direction, it's okay. The amount of additional staff and just
Fun.
really the amount of additional staff and funding that would be needed to insert ourselves into that role. And then you know, what is the legal authority to insert ourselves? I mean, there would be a lot of policy change to go along with that.
Yeah.
But that's in the brief conversation that we had, those were the big issues. He didn't bring up the liability, so I haven't put much thought into what that would be.
Yeah, I don't,
You know, if you look at the typical homeowner today, they're a lot less savvy than a land purchaser was historically. There was a consideration given to the drainage of the property. I mean, that was a big part of what someone would look at before they even considered purchasing land. And today, you know, they go find the real estate agent and they, you know, buy the house because they like the kitchen in the neighborhood and the school district.
Yeah.
I know a person that buy a house has never even been there. They just say saw it online.
A lot of mechanisms
Yeah.
in place that are working against the home buyer.
But that doesn't change the fact that it is kind of a buyer beware situation.
Right.
And if you do buy yourself a problem, you're kind of stuck with it. And I think that it would be a big deal for a municipality to say, we're going to police that, and we're going to make sure that people don't make bad mistakes, or if they do, that we're going to have a ready-made remedy for it.
Or if the city is inserting itself, then it has to come up with solutions, and what if that solution creates a bigger problem down, you know, at some
Yeah.
point?
Right.
Yep.
I mean, I think that's where the city could be liable.
Well, here's an entry point, another way to take a look at it. It's a couple of things I know about, and I've been scratching my head about them. I think, well, I'm gonna be on this environmental action committee. This sounds like appropriate issues. One property is downstream from a nursery, landscape, plants, so forth, and they have a pretty heavy chemical regime that they have to go through this time of year. They are keeping the critters at bay on all these plants that they're keeping for us to go and buy. And they irrigate every day. And so there's this toxic runoff. It's coming right onto the next property and marching right down the paved parking lot and past the children in the school, and
Yeah. people
are tracking in it and don't even know what it is, and it's obvious that it's a really bad situation. Here's another one.
Does it run in, have you been out there when it rains? Have you seen what the drainage does, or have you had a chance to see it?
Well,
I don't know
defer to Sarah. Drainage is drainage, whatever, if
And
it's
if
a
it's
natural drainage or if it's something, a swale someone's created.
Well, I didn't know if it's running off.
If you have a minimal
sheet
flow,
or-
if you have a minimal flow, it's gonna follow the thread, and if you have a more excessive flow, it's gonna spread out depending on what the grades are. Yeah, it's pretty predictable. But when you're running your sprinklers in an area half the size of this room, you know, that's just a vignette of the whole picture.
But you know, people that do spray, they try to do it at a time when they're not going to then wash it off again. And so, you know, I would think that if they are spraying, they're doing it in such a way that they're trying to keep it on the plants and not have it end up leaving the place.
Like
If it with any effluent, you know, if you're not containing it, if it leaves your property, then you know, you can have some repercussions from that.
Let me go to my second example then. This is a backyard where they like to raise dogs, generational. It's a dog compound year after year. And it's just bare earth and the kind of things you might expect dogs to eat. And horrible smell.
Is this in town?
And so I just brought these two examples up as ideas about, you know, if you're working with the bigger issues of insertion, that was the term that you used, how you get involved, what you bring to bear on it. It seems like those two examples there would be, there's something tangible they would work with.
Well, and
Like
on
you can
both
sample the water, right?
Yeah, and on both of them, I mean, my mind goes right to the reason. It's hard to know how much people are spraying, and if they're spraying, if they're watching the weather, if they know if they're gonna spray before a storm, they don't necessarily have seen the weather and they spray and then it rains. But if you have some sort of bioswale or something that's catching that runoff and uptaking it and assimilating it before it gets into the broader system, then it's a lot lower impact than piping it directly through the pipes into the gutter and straight into the stream without any sort of treatment. So, I mean, it goes back to really trying to get, same thing with around these, a place where they have a lot of animals or there's manure, if you can catch that and let it assimilate with vegetation or let it soak into the ground through the soil, that's gonna filter it a lot better.
But I guess my point was, if nothing's being done, and it's obviously awful, how involved is the city? What do we do? What does the city do as an entity to work from that first signal of trouble?
That's a good question.
You know, I think the bulk of those concerns, and they happen all the time, but most of them end up being resolved on an individual basis. Someone will see some water coming out of a neighboring business or whatever and say, gosh, that concerns me. And so they'll go up and they'll talk to the people and say, hey, you're concerning me. What's the possibilities here? And you know, if it's a modern, legitimate business today, they're probably going to say, well, here's what we're using, and here's what the rules say about that, and here's what we're doing to mitigate that, and may even say, gosh, we didn't realize the water was flowing away. We must have used too much. We'll cut back. You know, that's an example. The people, you know, with too many dogs, and that's really what the case is. If there's no vegetation, if they can't grow grass, then they've probably got too many animals there in one place.
That right there makes me wonder what's
and so
what is this like?
Yeah, well.
But
that's not a drainage problem.
Today we have people that are not very well educated in the right way to raise animals.
It is a drainage problem.
Well, I'm sure it is, but I mean, it sounds like an additional, there's another issue as
got
well.
Water quality.
You've got a tenth of an acre that suddenly has no vegetated cover on it.
Oh, I agree. It sounds like there's a problem.
But my point is, before the authorities get involved in situations like that, there's always an initiation I mean, not always, but there should be an initiation between the neighbor and the neighbor that they're concerned about.
Yeah.
Say,
So
Well,
I
I'm
think-
just curious if there's a forum, if there exists a forum, or if it's just kind of catch as catch can. There used to be a document, and its name was Thy Neighbor's Dog. Have you ever seen it? The city published it. Anybody?
No,
Seen
do
it?
we still have it?
Well, I don't have it, but
I mean,
surely somebody's still got it. And it's all about, you know, Aubrey, do you remember it? It's, the city's had it for a long time. It goes through many of the things you've mentioned, get in touch personally and talk over the issues.
Oh,
And so
okay,
forth.
like
Ask
the
a
neighborhood,
question.
like, we kind of have a new one like that, like being a good neighbor, it's called, good neighbor,
Mhm.
and what to do and how to work with your neighbors. And I think you're asking a very good question, is when you see it's a problem area, like there's a problem. Clearly, there's something that's probably polluting the water. There's probably, like,
You don't
based
need
on all
to
of
be
your,
rocket science.
that's right, based on what you're bringing together, you see this and it's probably an issue. I mean, and that's a good question, like what, can the city, can a neighbor say, can you call up and go, I know that there's pollution coming off of this piece of land that's, and is there something that, can the city address that?
I don't know if it's,
And so I guess that's what we're asking.
I think the city's
Sustainability.
responsible for it.
Pollution, there might be some rules on the pollution. Now, when you talk about the dogs,
Not,
off the top of my head,
not the dogs, but if there is a,
but like
they could
say,
be
because it's
emus,
sediment,
right?
now if it's,
say.
Emus do the same thing.
Right.
just different colors.
Sediment leaving, say, sometime, say somebody has, you know, like their laundry water running out to a ditch.
Yeah, very good.
Things like that are in the ordinance.
Is it
So
forbidden?
several water quality things are in the ordinance.
But if they
because-
just spray Roundup and then you see them spray Roundup and then a storm comes through and
Yeah,
that
we're
pours.
probably not gonna be able to prove it.
It's like how, yeah, I think that's where it's,
it's a, and I guess
Can you-
in the riparian zone ordinance, we did put certain things that, in those areas, you know, these are not permitted. But I think, you know, a lot of the city of Fayetteville, the way things are right now, which I think is okay in my view, but it takes an active citizenry. That it has to take making the call and saying, here's a problem area, and there are some things in place. And it may be that you have to link it to sediment, like on that dog situation, if there's clearly sediment, that's a stormwater management issue because of the sediment in the runoff. I think there's also an animal control issue there, to be honest.
Yeah,
That's what I meant by it, not
going
just drainage, but
down code enforcement.
code enforcement on that. But, and I would also say, I mean, it's worth making the call to find out, because there are also state regulations as far as like pesticides and herbicides,
most of those are federal.
and federal regulations that are required in that area. But I say it's always worth calling to ask and having somebody come look at it. Because especially if it's like, if they're dumping, you know, and if it's going straight into the curb or gutter and it's running down into it's going straight into the stream, you know, and that's just wiping out every mayfly and caddisfly and all those things.
Madam Chairman, may I ask
Yeah.
the other Sarah something? Is gray water forbidden to put in your yard in Fayetteville?
Well, I know you are not allowed to discharge it to the stream. Now, if you're talking about like watering plants, I think that the health department does not want you to do that,
The-
but I'm.
no,
By
they're-
gray water, we're talking about pre-toilet, we're talking about dishwater.
You know, John?
or
Yeah,
laundry
our
water.
best, on Joyce has a
Yeah.
gray water system that they use to irrigate their landscape.
Yeah.
And so
That's
it's
true. I was
allowed.
thinking about maybe
The-
soapy water.
I think the issue is that it's double metered by the water and sewer department, just to make sure that they're capturing I think how that works.
That'd be a good tour.
They're getting a price break.
Gray water.
Right, there's still a treatment issue associated with how they're using it. And, it's escaping me right now, but I know that it's allowed because I know AR.asf has it and they've gone through that process. For a long time, the state didn't allow it, and they've transitioned to allow it now because of the potential reuse. And I think Clubhouse actually has a gray water reuse, but it's not for irrigation purposes. They use their shower water to flush the toilet. So there are different instances like that.
Just for the sake of time, I'd like for us to talk about something that's come up repeatedly a few times here over the last. People have been calling me about it on various projects, on different and unrelated projects, and it has to do with whether or not the city project. So you're asking about if it's in-house design and that kind of thing was really related to this. So if the city initiates a project, and any project, whether it's a trail, if it's a utility line, if it's a road, if it's a district courthouse, whatever, a building, anything, does it? And since you deal with water, and does it have to be checked off? Does it have to be looked at through the same process and steps as a developer would have to go through? And that includes stormwater, tree preservation, the drain. Oh, of course you do drainage, and so that's what the question I've been asked a few times lately, and so that's what I would like to talk about.
So does the project she design have to go through the approval process?
The she design, but let's say, because see, the water and sewer department or the transportation department, they have their own design. They have their own people working in those areas. So if they put something together, does it have to follow our city ordinances, the same ones that a private developer would have to go through? And
Well, the apparent answer to that is no. I'll let Sarah be the expert.
well, this is what.
And I'm not a planner, and they're kind of the experts on what goes through review, but I'll try to answer. And the new development does go through our regular review process. For example, improvements to parks, a new fire station.
So parking lot.
Parking lot.
Those larger structures like that.
Maintenance type projects don't come through our development review. So like a water line replacement, some sort of maintenance activity on a utility. Those were those two things fall.
What about and one thing that was asked was about tree. In best management practices, a drip line around a tree. I think down around Cato Springs, they were looking at the trees, and not just the one tree that people were trying to protect, but almost like a symbol of what we need to do here. But there's a lot of trees around there, and it's a city-designed, city-initiated project, and people, they're involved in the process, which is good. But also, do those projects have to be? Are they inspected? Does someone go out, and how do we do that if it's our project and it's not really like there's a third-party inspection of your own project? It'd be like me reading.
They are inspected, like,
okay.
For example, township, our public works inspectors, we have an assigned to it, and that another forester was involved.
Okay.
And like for trails, it also applies.
Well, what would happen if
if the tree ordinance applies to the type of development it is, then it applies.
Okay, so the same ordinances apply to the city project as they do. Okay,
So if it turns out that the city project came through and cut down some trees that should have been preserved, just someone make note of that and go
Well,
back.
it's like we have ourselves mitigate.
Yeah, plant 100 trees for everyone that was cut down.
We could find out
Yeah,
about
that's a
that.
good question. I don't know what the
Now,
process
they
is.
may, you know, if they were like in a utility easement or something, and it was a utility activity, they may be allowed to be cut down.
There is a, that's,
Yeah.
there's a public safety thing. So if they have to go into, say we did the riparian zone, the streamside protection ordinance, if there's a water main inside the riparian zone, they have to go in and fix it. So there are public
There's no
safety,
control.
there's no control over that. So those kinds of things that are for the public good, they have to go in and fix those things. But I think it's a really good question is does the city have to mitigate in the same way that a private developer would have to?
I wish the state would, as they're widening 265.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, an example, if I may, where Duncan comes down from the university side and then turns in order to get to Martin Luther King, they put in a huge pipe along the street.
What
And
street, say it again, what street?
Duncan Avenue.
Okay.
From Parallels Hill, and it's a street I live on, but it's broken up in several pieces before we get to my house. But, and of course, our neighborhood has the loudest complaints, stormwater in the city, maybe for the last decade. But anyhow, they put in this huge pipe in replacing the swale. I assume they're gonna sidewalk over it, or at least put red dirt over it so it won't be absorbed anymore. But it ends about 100 feet from MLK, and there is an open swale there that's concrete, and so the water's gonna keep going fast when it hits that out of that big pipe, and then it gets to a smaller pipe to take it across the street. So when winter comes and there's water running over the street, which it will be forced to do when there's a lot of water, and it should freeze, you'll have ice right there by the railroad.
Who put it in?
Our guys, and they're completing it right now. And I asked them about that, and they said, no, this is what the engineers do, this is what we have to build. I always talk to my neighbors and I talk to workers, some of them don't like to be bothered, but you know, they usually answer the questions. Yeah, this is the water, we're digging this out because the line is broke, that's why we're digging all this out, or, you know, whatever, they don't mind explaining.
I have
Some of them ask me where to find the pictures online.
For you, a quote for you, I'll remember to tell you.
Okay, anyway, I don't want them to put a big pipe under the street as the high school did, a huge pipe to take their runoff. And it said they weren't going to do that, it's in schedule now, because it will increase flooding downstream in our neighborhood even more. But the absurdity of doing that part of the job, putting in a big pipe upstream and a small one, I can show you places all over town where that's been done. The National Cemetery just did it in the last year.
Is that something you're familiar with? Is that I mean,
I'm not intimately familiar
can
with
we,
it.
can we request that we look at that? Because it sounds like it's not quite right. It doesn't seem right, you know, it seems kind of odd. And I guess that would be an example of, we wonder if you're reviewing, if you get to review those things. Because I'm finding these things too, it's like there's designs that are happening in different departments, and are you getting to see those? And that's what really I'm concerned about, I think, is I'm not convinced
Consider that plan.
that you are
Engineering-
seeing all the things you need to see.
Engineering planned that Duncan drainage, it was a drainage area that was flooding several houses.
Yeah, it was running down to the west through some yards, and I never saw the flooding over there, but that's what they tell me. But it will leave the area where it falls faster down through that.
Yeah,
pipe.
and that seems like a good area where it could have an outfall, where you'd slow it down before it goes into the next phase. And I know we're considering doing more of those where you have it, like we did at Hamstring, where we're doing at the Red Oak Park, where it was slow and then flow over.
And it's the hardest part of these pieces of the system that you work on. You know, you want to make that system work well. You want to make it work great. And then you end your work at a certain point, and then who knows what happens downstream. It is a really big challenge when you're going in and fixing
Pieces of it.
of the.
And that, I think that is like a systemic approach problem to me, like that, like you're, almost like the system is not allowing you to take in a broader perspective, the way that we approach this. And that, I don't know, that's a problem that's very hard to address, and I'm not sure if it's how we can change that, but it seems like that is that same thing with looking at the map where the problem is. Like, it's like come out of it and look at a broader perspective, but like the funding is only to fix that little point. And we're only willing to pay for that little fix, even though we would save a lot of money if we went ahead and addressed the broader picture
Well, this
in the long run.
Sure, this illustrates what the weakness in our infill as a major goal. There should be a lot between there and the stream that's set aside to capture, and a little water captured in every yard. But if necessary, you buy a lot that's being flooded
So you
and
were
make
saying
it
earlier, it'd be cheaper to just buy the house and use it.
and make a big old retention pond that's actually a detention pond that's actually a rain garden. I go crazy when I see
Because
these.
sometimes it's
Yeah,
a space issue.
Oh, it is. It's very difficult in the infill. But when we say you can put 10 houses on 1 acre lot, we're saying there's no stormwater going to be preserved unless they get a huge barrel and catch everything that hits their roof at least. And they could do that. We would like that, but
Maybe we
that's
need an
not
update
important.
before too long about, with the drainage criteria manual that's being designed, I think that right there is something that needs to be addressed in the new language of the drainage criteria. If we are using infill in parallel and in tandem, there needs to be this type of thing taken into account, where you're saying, if you do infill, there are these types of stormwater mitigation, like slowing it down, catching it, collecting it, using gray water, this idea that you can just let it run onto somebody else's property because
Beyond detention requirements?
well, detention is,
I know.
using it everywhere just because it just doesn't fit everywhere. So many, like small fixes, small approaches, integrated, complex approach rather than just a detention.
But in the process of doing the infill, you see that lots that did have absorbance on it and didn't have a problem, they get red dirty. Somebody's already said that too, right?
Well, I was just thinking
Shows you a bunch of that.
about something that I saw on Block Street the other day. One of the businesses down there, you get a haircut down there. And, well, put me to thinking about, okay, water problems. We're scratching our heads about water problems. But your sustainability guru might say that it's an issue of how you're thinking about your resource. It's water, right? So you can think about it as a resource that you have too much of. Just another way of looking at it.
Yeah.
What the business is doing is they have an air conditioner over the doorway. Just a little air conditioner. And there's something coming out of the air conditioner that's kind of a little bit of trouble. it's water. It's pulling water out of the room and it's dripping it out of hose right by the front door. Maybe you've seen this. Have you
Yeah.
seen what she's doing down there?
Oh, no, I haven't. She is.
Well, she's got a big plastic tub sitting there, and there's a couple of rubber duckies floating around. The dogs come by and get green.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Kids play in it.
Need to hang a tin cup by it.
But you know, you can always resort to that way of thinking about your problem, is that everything is a resource. And all this water is as well. And we just were wondering where it all went, wasn't it? How many weeks ago?
Right, now we're really like, we were all standing out going, oh, rain, the other day.
Where did it all go?
Well, okay, so as far as next steps on this, a couple things. I love the idea of having, like, keeping our eyes open for good ideas of things that are working and sharing those with staff. If you see things that you'd like staff to come look at, like, look how good this is working and it's raining. You have all this record of all of this. You know, if you see things, and if we can pass that along, rather than things that don't work, how can we show them things that are working, that we do support? And then also, I'd really like to look at the maintenance, and, you know, like, if that's not being reviewed, like, what are we, you know, what does that entail? You know, maintenance can become a big project sometimes. And then this idea of the tree mitigation and how that.
That's a question.
Yeah, just a question, or what does, this was part of this discussion around Cato Springs we were asking about. And then I wonder about the infill and the drainage criteria manual. I'd like to find out.
Well, on this trees that are put in mitigation are supposed to be watered by the property owner.
Yeah.
And it just occurred to me a couple of days ago that since the very earliest time when they installed a sprinkler system for the new trees along the edge of the street coming out of the development by my house, I thought, well, I haven't seen that water poured. I haven't seen it sprinkled. Maybe it did the first year, the first fall, or whatever. But I haven't seen it going on. And those trees are starting to droop a little bit. And they're actually not planted in the original soil because that part had been filled. And so they've just got mulch around them because that keeps a little moisture in the soil they are in, but root spread rather than that. So it really has to be residents of an area that complain, because people don't have time. You know, you don't have, I'm going to drive to every place in town, for instance, the tree administrator, and say, I'm going to check on every one of these trees that we require them to be planted. Well,
Yeah.
something new is happening he has to do. And so it is up to people to report it. And I don't report everything I see because I put the pictures online. And
So when you find
hope
something
that
that's
somebody
good,
else will look at it and do it, because City Hall folks get tired of hearing from me. And
you can send them,
So-
when you find a good idea that was, like, when it's raining and you're taking a picture of a stormwater system that works, send it to me and I'll
Well,
pass it along, or you can send it to Sam.
I
But
think
if you want to send it to somebody else.
Richard and I've discussed some of the places he knows that do work.
I was telling him about the trust street. It's a tour de force. It's a lot of structures and it's a lot of riprap, but it's an impossible problem to solve in the first place. And I think the city had to acquire some right of way to actually make that happen.
It's obviously very steep there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but, you know, a good one that really is doing what it should, to me, it's a great pleasure to see it. It's in concrete, and it's, you know, whenever we were driving around town, that one morning, whenever it was coming again, the next time through, you know, where can I go? You mentioned Missouri Creek. Does that go through the intersection of Old Wire and 265?
I think Acosta does.
Yeah.
here and there.
Yeah, I remember a June flood back in the 80s where there was a Datsun pickup sitting at the intersection and water was going in the top of the door.
Wow.
The window was rolling out.
That's New Casca.
And I thought, well, that's why that sewer plant's sitting up on that mountain there at the intersection. To be above the flood.
And like one day our sidewalk inspector, CC's everywhere, he said, Sarah, he said, I'm gonna show you a subdivision that has really good drainage. The way they built the houses, just the way they placed each house. And so he showed it to me and you know, that was educational. We were trying to work on what we wanted to try to get from the house builders. And he's right, I've never had a call from that subdivision. And so
Those kind of things you need to see more of. We can help you do that. All right, well, I would like to know, for, let's say July. So for August, are there specific requests for topics? And then otherwise I'll probably follow up with you, John, about a couple of these things. But I would just challenge you to keep your eyes open. If it does rain, watch for these systems that are working and that are slowing the water down, soaking the water in, and keeping it from, you know, that manages the stormwater in a way that protects water quality and also water quantity. So, but are there other topics? I know I want to have an opportunity for update. On Monday evening is the Habitat Project presentation with Bruce Shackelford on the 18th at 6 and
Library.
at the library. And so you can come and do that. It's a educational series for the Neighborhood Habitat Project. And I'll be hosting that. Terry's out of town, so I get to be there. And so I hope you'll be able to come.
And then I talk the following Monday on butterflies.
Okay, so on the 25th. On Monday the 25th. All right, well, good. It's the 25th, and so I hope you'll get involved with that. And then also, I know that the local food project is still ongoing, and then the recycling project. James and I shared an email. That's about as far as we got, and so we haven't done a very good job of helping you. I haven't anyway done a very good job of finding it. And James, I shouldn't say we. I haven't done it. James, you may have found some information.
It's there's a lot of propaganda out there. I'll put it that way. I mean, you can find information, but it sure does. Most of it seems to have an agenda. Either look what a good job we're doing, or you know, something to that effect.
Okay, so we need to look for.
It's hard to find really
sources.
Objective stuff. And
studies.
if we're going to have a metric, I'll be brief, but if we're going to have a metric, it needs to be one that actually works and measures what we need to be measuring. Because if we have one that's bad, you know, we're going to be pushing the work off in the wrong direction.
Okay.
Weren't you looking for some comparable cities and the diversion rates? I was wondering if Northwest Arkansas Regional Planning Office might have some numbers. They're kind of networked out.
I think we're looking across the U.S.
Yeah.
In other cities, because really Fayetteville leads in a lot of ways around this area. So we're trying to find places.
I was just pointing them out as
Yeah.
a resource that might have a database.
Sure. Oh yeah.
One of the cities I visited was London, Kentucky, and they actually recycle 3 through 7 in this country. And I'm waiting to get a list of where they recycle, where they send it, but they mentioned Georgia, but I don't know the exact location.
And you know, that American Bloom would probably be a really good source for cities that are doing this kind of thing.
The other thing, and I'm trying to get some more information from them as well, also in London, Kentucky, they got a grant from Paul Mitchell Hair for $25,000 for community gardens, and we toured a couple of the sites. This one garden produced 22,000 pounds of food.
Wow.
Last year.
Wow.
And the head of the company, John Paul
Mitchell?
No, it's
No.
like
Oh, that's
Sebastian or,
La Joria or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's gonna give even more money. next year. I mean, it's just a phenomenal program.
Wow, okay. Very good.
One thing on the recycling project, there's a public survey out there, and you can go to accessfayetteville.org, fill that out. So that would be really.
And it's an easy survey too.
Okay.
Tried to keep it brief.
Okay, so everyone, fill out the public survey on the resource study. Okay. Well, if you, in the meantime, and if you have some specific topics you'd like for us to talk about, John and I will come up with plenty, but I want to make sure and ask you if you're involved in something and you want to bring it forward, you want us to invite a staff person or a community expert to the meeting, let us know. And so with that, if there are any other comments or questions or follow up with Sarah?
Thanks for letting me talk about my little part of the world.
Of course, yeah, thanks for all your hard work.
Sorry, I missed it, Sarah.
That's all right, Aubrey. You already know.
What else is on the agenda?
We're ready to go.
Ready to go?
We're done. But, oh, no, I'm not done. I have one more thing. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, go
If I
ahead.
may,
Yeah.
this is
You want me to,
shared.
read it out loud?
You
Or what is
may,
it?
and I'll
Are
pass
they
a
all
copy
different?
around. This I prepared for my neighborhood success story. It's going on right now. Pinnacle Foods, many acres out there, quite a few acres. Cindy's walked it with me once.
So, well, it
And they
says,
mowed last year on the 20th of August because it was extremely dry. And as soon as we started to have this drought, I got freaked out. I said, we've got to let them know we appreciate they're not mowing until this point this year.
yeah.
And because they actually, one of the things, John was involved when we were working on that trail back there when the developers were doing it. You were out there with the others and with Matt and so forth. It's
Cool.
the
Good
trail.
for you.
The
Yeah.
trail is getting.
Yay, Aubrey.
It's a free prairie that didn't need any restoration. It does need winter only management. Just like Bruce will talk about what they're doing with the Woolsey wet prairie that's man-made to replace some actual wet prairie that was covered with a big old sewage treatment plant. But this particular land has never been plowed. It's been left in the wild things to grow there naturally. And of course, it does have some invasives coming like everywhere in Fayetteville. But by mowing during the summer, they've been mowing it about 3 times during the growing season. So that encouraged the non-natives, the fescue and so forth, that's winter grass, and prevented the perennials generally come back every year. They try, but then they get mowed down, so you don't get to see them in bloom or go to seed. But the ones that are hurt the most are the annual natives that don't get to go to seed, and they simply disappear from certain portions. And part of what they mowed last August has primarily Queen Anne's lace, which the state highway department calls wildflower and plants it, but it's one Bruce had volunteers out there on one TV segment that Bruce recorded a couple of years ago when he's just got them pulling the seed heads off or the flowers off the Queen Anne's lace, so because it tends to keep coming. It is
Can I-
invasive. So
can I read
if
it?
you want to, this is to encourage them to keep doing what they're doing. And
It says certificate of recognition, whereas Pinnacle Foods Incorporated owns an exemplary parcel of wet prairie adjacent to the west side of World Peace Wetland Prairie in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Whereas Pinnacle's wetland mix of native tall grasses and many wetland-specific flowering plants offers an oasis of habitat for urban wildlife in an area rapidly being cleared, dredged, and filled for development. And whereas Pinnacle's protecting its wet prairie from mowing from the past 2 years supports Fayetteville's goal of becoming Arkansas's first city certified as a community wildlife habitat by the National Wildlife Federation, and supports Fayetteville's Streamside Protection Ordinance, and supports the Natural Yards Resolution of the Fayetteville City Council, and supports the town branch neighborhoods flash flood prevention effort. Then
hey, that's not the final draft, but
but it just, we were doing all these great things. Then it be proclaimed that Pinnacle Foods Incorporated is the 2011 World Peace Wetland Prairie Volunteer Watershed and Wildlife Habitat Corporate Green Infrastructure Cooperator. 2012 goal, keep the water where it falls, mow only in winter, protect the native pollinators on the native prairie plants.
Okay, and
I think that's really important. It's really important. That is great. And okay, go ahead.
if you guys
Thank
want
you.
to make a resolution that you support this, then we might get our EAC logo on the final version. And
Okay.
I actually, yes, if you want to go to it, I'll shut up just a second. Lindsley's got it, and I didn't hear back from her since Friday or whenever she said she was going to work on it,
Okay.
and decide exactly what all to do with it. Get it so the mayor can do it soon before more mowing should suddenly occur.
Oh, I think that's a brilliant idea.
And, excuse me, so I would like to have a city committee, particularly this one, have its name on it.
Would
It's the
anyone
right
like to
place
make a
it comes
motion? That we
So
would
moved.
support? So move second?
Wait,
We're moving to
To support.
support.
Okay.
So I'm taking it you're moving to support this, okay.
I second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
All right, so we can put our emblem on this. Is that right?
I think so. I
Okay.
don't think it's been
Well, you
printed,
can now ask if we
I
can.
will.
Okay,
Or you may.
all right.
Might be appropriate
You-
as president. that you-
Okay.
or
Well, you
chairman.
tell me, I get with Lindsley?
Please.
Okay, I can do that. And then along those similar lines, I want to give you a round of applause for appreciating. I think that is the way to go on that kind of thing.
Well, it's purely selfish.
Well,
because I'm not
it's
planning.
because you were passionate about it. You're passionate about it, that's so important. So we want to get the word out about that for sure. And so also, John, you want to talk about?
Sure,
these?
so this Lindsley Smith, the city's communications director, is moving to make more recognition of the volunteers such as yourselves that participate on each of the committees. And one of the ways that that's happening is by presenting official certificates recognizing your place in the Environmental Action Committee.
So Aubrey?
Oh, my goodness. I've only been on here a few months.
Well,
Thank you.
See a certificate first.
That's right, Cindy Cope?
Nice try.
It is.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you, this is
Well,
really nice.
Through American and Bloom, we
Hold on,
tabulated
Richard.
the volunteer hours.
Hold on,
There's
Richard.
500,000 volunteer hours given to the city of Fayetteville
Woo! That's
Wow.
amazing. James?
through various
Yeah,
organizations.
That's really cool that that they put this together. That's really good.
Very nice.
Angie?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And we don't have everyone here, so I think we'll bring these back. And we have Amy and Terry and Susan and Connie and then myself too. Cool. Thank you.
Would you like us to share?
Okay.
here, I'll
Yay! You know, certificates are awesome. They're under, sometimes we forget how nice that is. It's important. It is important. You can put that on your wall. That's good news. Thank you. All right. Well, with that, I think we'll close on that good news, and I hope you'll hang your certificate up. And this group puts a lot of work in. It's one of the most active groups we have, and I hope you recognize that and you're recognized for bringing up these good topics and bringing that to the table for discussion. And we haven't had a chance to really just sit around and talk about some of these topics. So I enjoyed the conversation today, and Sarah, thanks for being here. So with that, we'll close. We're adjourned. Thank you.